Sunday, Steve and I were just talking. If you have not been to church yet, the gospel is not what is normally done for All Saints Sunday. I think for the second time in the 28 years I've been ordained, I chose a different gospel than the normal assigned one. The reason being because of the election and the vilification and rancor and all that's going on. I chose the part from Matthew's gospel. It's the Sermon on the Mount, by the way, where Jesus says, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." And then talked about that specifically. So I talked about religion and politics in the sermon, which I don't think I've ever done before. Well, we'll see. I get to do it at least once more, so if I don't see you next week, it's been great knowing you. Today, after would you tell us briefly, by the way, high holidays, we've talked about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, all of that. What's the other big thing in the Jewish tradition that you just observed or celebrated, or either one? Celebrated.
The holiday is called Simchat Torah, and Simchat Torah is a celebration of completing the reading of the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and then immediately taking it up again and starting Genesis anew. And that moment is celebrated as sort of the capstone to the high holiday season.
Bonus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So every year they read the whole Torah or Bible, is that right?
Right.
Was there another holiday in there?
Sukkot.
What is Sukkot?
Feast of Booths. Pentecost? Is it? Yeah?
Is it? Pentecost has been many things. This and agricultural festival as well. Lots of things get conflated, we would say where I'm from, squished together, and then meaning changes over time. And so you had to take a break after all that, I assume.
I did.
Now, thank you. So now he's back. Today and then 2 following Sundays, we're going to talk about Advent and the stories within Advent. In what, Aaron and I were just talking about this. What is Advent? And it's most like, what would a confirmation class say? Preparation. Excellent. Here's a fun one I learned when I was 19. Awaiting a divine vision, entering a new time. That's true. Advent, how many weeks is it? 4. It's the 4 Sundays before Christmas, so sometimes the very end of November, usually beginning of December. And it's 4 weeks. The color, so it's its own season. It's the beginning of the church's new year. And the color is blue or purple. It could be either one. And it has a dual focus. And most people, oddly, miss the focus, one part of the focus, and hold on to the other. But the readings on Advent are very, very confusing. So the dual focus is preparing for the first coming of Jesus, what we'd call Christmas or the Incarnation. And specifically, I'll go ahead and say this, we're not celebrating Jesus' birthday on Christmas. That's not the point at all. It's the Incarnation, that God becomes a human being, and we observe that at Christmas. So that's one piece. The other piece is preparing for the second coming of Jesus. Judgment, entering in or bringing in the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, what in the Jewish tradition would be called the Messianic age. We hold those two arrivals, coming, preparation, so we're preparing for the first and second coming of Jesus in Advent. Now, if you read the lessons, particularly the gospel lessons in Advent, who remembers what they are? Anybody? A lot of Isaiah. It's not what you expect, because I bet if you go to Target right now, it's Christmas music because Halloween's over. Am I wrong? There's going to be Christmas music. What's that?
You're late. They already started weeks ago.
My fault. Thank you. They already started weeks ago. There's a really good local radio station that does so-called holiday music, like now till right after New Year's. it's all this focus on Christmas. The readings don't sound that way. There'll be days of dark gloom, and then a little bit of John the Baptist, and then it rotates. What we're going to talk about in this series of classes is a slightly different version of the story. So we can talk about, as much as you're interested, the second coming, the apocalyptic type literature. But what we almost never get to read, or never in this case, is a really great story of Zechariah and Elizabeth and the birth of John the Baptist, or the preparation for the birth of John the Baptist. And then the story of Mary and Joseph as it evolves and then leading into Christmas. So these are the stories, and how do they have Jewish parallels, and how might a Jew hear these same stories? Because remember, the first followers of Jesus were almost exclusively Jewish. And so these stories, we miss parts of them if we don't know the context, the backstory. Would someone like to come up? I forgot to print this for everybody, to read the Gospel of Luke, preferably a female, so it's not just two guys talking the whole time. Oh, Charlotte. It starts here. Oh.
The Gospel of Luke. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was a descendant of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. But they had no children because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. Once, when he was serving as priest before God, and his section was on duty, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and offer incense. Now at the time of the incense offering, the whole assembly of the people was praying outside. Then there appeared to him an angel of the Lord, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was terrified, and fear overwhelmed him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He must never drink wine or strong drink. Even before his birth, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit. He will turn many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. With the spirit and power of Elijah, he will go before him to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Zechariah said to the angel, "How will I know that this is so? For I am an old man, and my wife is getting on in years." The angel replied, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and bring you this good news. But now, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time, you will become mute, unable to speak until the day these things occur." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondered at his delay in the sanctuary. When he did come out, he could not speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the sanctuary. He kept motioning to them and remained unable to speak. When his time of service was ended, he went to his home. After those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she remained in seclusion. She said, "This is what the Lord has done for me when he looked favorably on me and took away the disgrace I have endured among my people."
Thank you very much. Good reading by Charlotte. Yep. So that story begins with King Herod of Judea. Who in the world was King Herod of Judea? Nice guy, benevolent king, the type of guy you'd like to elect as your president, for example? Say that again? He used taxes a lot to build, not necessarily what the people wanted. He built castles, including fortresses, including Masada. So it starts with, in the time of King Herod, in the days of King Herod of Judea, to place it in historical context. Herod of Judea was an absolutely rotten person and king by most accounts. So was he Jewish? Kind of, but not really. He was in cahoots with the Romans, which was about as bad a betrayal as you could have there. He built pagan cities. He later killed, I was trying to remember, his wife, all his sons, most of his sons. He must have had a lot of sons with a lot of women because he didn't get all of them. And different, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa, Herod the Great, the second, they're different ones there, wiped out everybody, and then his death commanded that every family should have one person killed, so the whole world would be in mourning when I died. Like that is quite a complex of power, I would suggest. Herod is also the one in another gospel responsible for the so-called slaughter of the innocents, just in case there might be a king, Jesus, that takes over. I'll just kill all the male babies around, just in case, to wipe them all out. That's pretty severe type of person. So John the Baptist, this new miracle birth, will be in the political intrigue of the day. And by the way, who ends up killing John the Baptist? Remember? Salome. Ask for it. It's one of these sons that gets his head on a silver platter after Salome dances for him. And then mom says, do this. It's a really twisted, messed up family. Reasonable to say. So there is Herod, and then introduces, and notice the contrast. Herod is, again, semi-Jewish in name, I think that's fair to say, but acts nothing like a faithful Jew. And notice how the story immediately contrasts Herod with Elizabeth and Zachariah. How are they portrayed in the story? Faithful, followers of all the commandments. Very good. And it's very delicate how it's put, Charles. It doesn't say decrepit, very old people. It says getting on in years. They're older, particularly Elizabeth in terms of having a baby. They're older. Both were righteous before God. They were blameless of all the commandments, but they had no children because she was barren. Note, in much of the Bible, or that worldview, you must have done something to deserve your illness or your malady. Is there a connection between something bad they've done and being barren? No. Was there, in the original story of the original Jews, who am I talking about? Remember Genesis last year? Sarah was barren. Had Sarah or Abraham done anything to deserve it?
No.
No. That's just the way things are. So interestingly, in this barrenness, they've done nothing to deserve it at all, of not being able to have a child, which was very important in that culture as it is in all of them. They were both good, but she was getting on in years, so the time that she would have become pregnant has passed. So this is setting it up to be another miracle birth. So the big one, Abraham and Sarah with Isaac, so Abraham being the first Jew, is that fair to say?
Yes.
So the first Jew, Abraham and Sarah, have this miracle baby when they're both too, or she's too old to have it. Are there any other miracle births in the Hebrew Scripture?
Yes. Excuse me. Rebecca, who's going to give birth to Jacob and Esau also prays for that pregnancy to take place. I'm thinking of Jacob and Rachel similarly have their issues in this regard. Hannah and her husband Eli prays or sees her praying to God, thinks she's drunk, right? But this idea, this sort of plumb line of couples who can't conceive. Invariably, it's the woman who gets blamed for being the barren one, right? Which is, we should sort of appreciate that strain of misogyny that runs through it. Not unlike kings who would behead their wives if the wife didn't provide them a son, because they knew nothing about biology and genetics in terms of who provides the Y chromosome, right? So that's just part of a theme. But yes, this idea of a barren couple, if you will, and then miracle births are a common trope in this literature.
And who obviously is responsible for the miracle birth?
God.
God. So note how this story fits in that Jewish context. Oh, we're very familiar with this story. There are all these examples where good, wonderful, decent, faithful people just couldn't have a baby, and here God intervenes to bring about this miracle birth. And then we get to this Zechariah. By the way, what does the name Zechariah mean? Anybody know? God remembers. Kind of cool. What does Elizabeth mean? Natalie read the book too. God keeps promises. God is an oath keeper. John, by the way, means what? Anybody know? God is righteous, gracious. God is gracious. So these things are going on. They're a person, an individual, but also a type, archetype that's happening here. What does a priest, that Zechariah is a priest and taking his turn in the temple, and interestingly, how do you get to be in the temple as a priest? You're qualified, you go through a primary season, you have discussions and debates. They drew lots. They rolled dice. All of you are qualified. Now it's your turn. Your number came up. That's it. Would that be a cool way to do other things? So, what about? Tell us, if you would, Aaron, about the role of the priest and the temple. Who is this guy, Zechariah?
So the priesthood, you can't just choose to go into the priesthood the way you can choose a professional track. It's dynastic, it's genetic. If your father was a priest, well, now you're born into the priestly clan. Jewish communities to this day are aware of, or individual Jews may be aware of, that they're from the priestly line. Typically, if your last name is Cohen or Kogan or Kaplan, or right, that tends to be suggestive that you have Kohen is the word for one of the words for priest, that you can trace your line back. In liberal Jewish communities, that makes we're not interested in the distinctions based on your pedigree or who your father or grandfather was in terms of having privileges in the community. But in a more traditional community, the first and second honor of being called to the Torah, for instance, at a Sabbath service, would go to that priestly line.
So if you similar like Levi.
Yes, Levites. So Levites are another class of the priests. And so Zechariah was in his community. This is before the worship gets consolidated in Jerusalem at the temple, and all these priests are scattered about in their various communities and playing the role of, I don't mean that in any way dismissively or to be glib, but they are essentially the intercessor between the Jew in the pew, if you will, and God. They're facilitating or effectuating the rituals and the sacrifices and the ways in which people are loyal to the covenant.
Is that a biblical term, the Jew in the pew?
No, it doesn't show. It actually doesn't show up in Scripture.
The term Levite, by the way, how might that have somebody taken a family name?
Levi, Levine, Levine, Levy,
Levins,
right?
Levinson. All those, that's names. In English, particularly Caucasian English heritage, names mean a little less. They might mean what you did, carpenter or miller or smith. There, in Hebrew culture, names mean something, part of your tradition and identity in a different way than just what you did. That's an oversimplification, but Remember, these names are not chosen by accident. They mean something. They're conveying something in the story. So Zachariah and Elizabeth are a good, faithful couple. He's a priest, and it happens to be his turn in the temple. Who may go into the temple, Rabbi?
Only
Just
the priests.
anybody?
Only the priests.
Only the priest. So if I went back into the temple, no one else really knew what was going on except the other priest. And part of that was to light incense, to offer the prayers to God. And while he's there, Zechariah is met by an angel. Now, what does an angel signify in the Bible? They're messengers. They're ambassadors, exactly. So this angel comes to deliver a message. Note what the angel's name is. The big guy, yes, who goes by Gabriel. Gabriel appears later with Mary in the Jesus birth story. So he's conveying two miracle births there. What is a reasonable response when an angel, remember these are not the chubby little babies with wings. They're what? I don't know. They're not called pooties or whatever. They cherub-like things. Angels in the Bible are fierce. Every single time people are terrified. He's not a little unnerved. He's terrified. And the verb, by the way, here in Greek, which the gospel is, you're shaken up. So if he's a snow globe, you just shook everything and you're completely out of sorts. So this angel appears right next to the altar of incense. It says, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer's been heard." What prayer? To be a parent, to pass on this priestly line, to pass on the name, to have children. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear a son, and you will name him John. In that culture, is it very normal to take the father or mother's name?
Yes.
Yes. Fairly typical, junior, third, fourth, whatever. Fairly typical there. But you didn't choose a name outside your family. That was extremely rare. So the angel says, name him John, a command, and John means what again? God is gracious. So you will have joy and gladness, many will rejoice at his birth. He must never drink wine or strong drink. Why? Does that rule apply to everybody? If you're Baptist, it does, but pretty much everybody else, you're good. His mind must always be focused. He must be pure. He must be set apart because he has a particular mission from day one. It doesn't say this, well, it actually does. He will turn many of the people of Israel to their Lord, their God. And this is so easily missed by a non-Jewish reader. With the spirit and power of Elijah, he will go before him. Okay, that's neat. So what? That means something. Who is Elijah within Judaism, Rabbi?
So Elijah is the prophet that serves as the harbinger of the Messiah. Elijah is going to be the one that's going to foretell the coming of the Messiah. And in Jewish tradition, Elijah has an even larger role than that. Elijah is considered the one who will resolve all the conflicts or all the disagreements or all the debates over what a scriptural text means or the like. Elijah will be the one in a later time to adjudicate all of that. So he's considered a messenger of peace, a messenger who's going to bring the good news of the Messiah, that Elijah is the precursor to the end times or to the denouement.
You have to have Elijah before the Messiah, correct? Everybody knows that.
Right.
Does he have a role at Passover Seder?
So if you've been to a Passover Seder, there's usually a cup that's set aside for Elijah. We open the door for Elijah. Elijah doesn't show up, and so we continue waiting. But the idea is that the Seder meal, which is about retelling the story, right, from slavery to redemption, from degradation to deliverance, and Elijah is part of that story, the penultimate moment, right, before the ultimate deliverance or the ultimate redemption.
Go out in a blaze with chariots.
So that's the story, that Elijah ascends to heaven in a chariot, such that when we sing Amazing Grace, swing low, sweet chariot, that's the idea, that we want to not lose touch with Elijah or fail to appreciate. Elijah also shows up in rabbinic literature contemporaneous with the early Gospels, wherein Elijah shows up in places completely unexpectedly, or the beggar in the street, or the one you least imagine would have anything to bring that would be worthy of your attention or your time. That person too could be Elijah, right? Sort of a manifestation of a possibility and what you least expect.
So every hearer of the gospel originally would have known everything he just said about who this figure is. So they're setting up, the gospel writer is setting up this John figure, he's not called John the Baptist yet, this new figure whose name shall be John, God is gracious, is this new Elijah figure. And this is chapter 1, verse 5. So there's the intro, and then it starts with this story. Here's Elijah, the forerunner of the Messiah, right at the beginning, another miracle birth, just like the very beginning of Judaism, launching this new story. Elijah, he will go before him to turn the hearts of parents to their children and disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So preparing for this Messiah figure. And Zechariah hears all this stuff and says to the angel, "How will I know this is so?" FYI, word of advice, if an angel shows up to talk to you, don't ask stupid questions. Like, how'd you get in? How'd you get out? You know, how am I going to die? Don't ask any of that stuff. Just say, "Wow, you're so smart and clever, and thank you so much, and I agree with everything you just said." Zechariah said to the angel, "Dummy, how will I know that this is so? For I am an old man, and my wife is getting on in years." If God sends an angel to show up in whatever you're doing, can God bring, life where there isn't any? Yes. The angel replied, without patience, that's what it strikes me, slightly annoyed, put off. You don't know who I am? It's like, how many times does this trope come up in shows we watch? Hello, Miss Jensen. It's doctor, actually. That, if you ever heard that, it's making sure that you get, I am important. I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. Why do you not know who I am, you annoying mortal person? Because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time, you will become mute and unable to speak. It doubles the meaning. Mute, unable to speak until the day these things occur. Story, scene ends. Goes to outside. I wonder, hey, what's Zechariah doing? He's been in there a long time. How long does it take to light incense? I don't know, like 10 minutes? What's he doing in there? And they wondered at his delay in the sanctuary, as one might. When he did come out, he could not speak to them. And interestingly, they realized he had a vision in the sanctuary. How would you react if Aaron and I went in there and then we came back and our faces are glowing and we're scared and we couldn't talk? Have you guys been drinking sacristy wine? No, I mean, that's a reasonable. Are you faking it or you really can't talk? You go through all we've exhausted everything else. Maybe he had a vision from God or something. And then, I, by the way, welcome this. If anybody would like to, remember you're on camera, would like to come up, I am looking at a brilliant actor who just walked in the room. Without using words, this is a charades master class. How would you play the role of Zechariah and try to convey to all of us here, the hearers outside the sanctuary, what the angel told you? You'd have to act it out. How would you do that? How do you convey through charade sign language? I was lighting the incense, and then an angel appeared to me, and the angel said, even though you and Elizabeth are old, you're going to have a baby, just like all the Jewish stories. And then you didn't believe me, so then he made me mute, and I'm supposed to name him John, even though that's not a family name. and it's very confusing. And what else? And he's mad at me too, the angel, and his name is Gabriel. How do you convey all that? It's a lot of sign language. I mean, it's like, whoa, so here's Elizabeth, and how else do you do that? Anybody want to give it a go?
Moving right along.
Okay. I was hoping any actors in here wanted to give it a go. Oh, right, we have 2 actors in here. Sorry, I forgot. So he tries to convey that to everybody about what is happening there. He kept motioning to them and remained unable to speak. And then it just leaves that scene. And it goes back to presumably everybody goes away and says when Zechariah's time of service in the temple had ended, he went back home. So you have this miraculous thing. It's like what happens to anybody. You try to process it, and then, the trip is over, vacation's over, you go back to your normal life. And when did Elizabeth get pregnant?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
And, do you really think people left and didn't talk about it?
Oh, I think,
How much news and energy do you think left?
great question, because it says earlier, like everybody in the town was talking about it. However well he conveyed that whole story, and you know how it is, people make up stuff, so it was probably way more fantastic than even he was trying to convey, and they're all talking about it. But at the end, he still got to go home. When did Elizabeth, in this story, get pregnant? When he went home. I don't want to overthink this, but presumably in the natural way when they went home. So different than the miraculous. So is it a miraculous birth? Well, she was barren, and then they conceived. Again, presumably husband and wife together. Jesus, that comes later, was not that same natural way. So there's a distinction. One is holy, but the other one is super holy. And that would have been caught by everybody hearing that story. After those days, so when his time of service was ended, Zechariah went to his home. After those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she remained in seclusion. She said, "This is what the Lord has done for me when he looked favorably on me and took away the disgrace I have endured among my people," which a very similar thing is said by Sarah, is it not? That she's barren, and now she's singing this song of jubilation, joy, that she is, this shame, a sense of shame has been removed from her.
Yes.
So there's an echo of that earlier Jewish story in there that, again, everybody would have picked up on.
Yes.
So when the people presumably angels, showed up, we're having this conversation with her in the other room, weird. You're an old woman, getting on in years, but you're going to have a baby. She started laughing, which I would say is a reasonable thing. Oh my God. Oh, was she laughing out of nerves? Was she laughing for happiness, relief? Baby, if you're an 80-year-old person, woman, would you like to have a baby? Oh my God, no. Oh, that's why it's best for young people. It's hard. They cry, all those things. So there's a miracle, and they're going to need a lot of help. Why is this an Advent story?
It has to do with looking forward.
John announces that he's coming. Much later, of course.
Later, John he's the forerunner of Jesus. He is very much like that Elijah figure. Did somebody over here start to say something? Excellent. How are Jesus and John the Baptist related by family connection? Or another way to say this, how are Mary and Elizabeth related to one another? Cousins. We don't know if that's first, second, third cousin, but they are related. And obviously Elizabeth is much older than Mary, by the way, was 15, give or take, 16, somewhere in there. and so much older, but they are family relations. And so John the Baptist and Jesus would have been at least second cousins, if you follow that literally. So there also is a family relation there. At the beginning, it made a big deal that Zechariah belonged to the priestly order of Abijah, so he's a local priest. But more importantly, his wife Elizabeth was a descendant of Aaron. Who Aaron was Aaron in the Bible?
So you may remember that Aaron is Moses' brother and is the first high priest in the Torah. High priest. Right.
And he was the one that could speak for Moses.
The original Aaron spoke eloquently, and Moses did not,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Right. Moses is described as having a speech impediment of whatever sort, and so Aaron speaks in his stead when they go to Pharaoh. That idea. Right. But Aaron is the first high priest, the first priest, or the first high priest.
So showing the family connection that Elizabeth has to the first high priest back towards the beginning of, the Exodus and coming into the Promised Land. But is the story dependent on the pedigree, the genealogy of Zechariah, Elizabeth, or John the Baptist? Scripturally speaking, does it matter who your ancestors are, if you're in the Mayflower Society, or if you are connected to this person or that person? Why does that matter? It gives you cred. There's certain way, when you're talking about Jesus, we get these long genealogies. That is specifically to show that Jesus, as the Messiah, fulfills the expected promises. He will come from the line of David. But if you actually look at most of the, I would say all the Bible, do you have to be a particularly holy or good or righteous person to be in the story? Think back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, how they treated, oh my God, they were awful people. Do you not remember that? They were not so great. Not that you'd want to have them as your spiritual ancestors or your own relatives. It doesn't matter at one level if the person's good or not. It doesn't matter at another way if this person has the right spiritual pedigree. What matters is how they act, how they are faithful to the covenant, faithful to the commandments. In a particular way, it does matter what their pedigree is to show forth a promise. So could John the Baptist have come from just any pagan family? No. He needs to be from the right line, the right tradition. But his parents, just like Mary and Joseph with Jesus, she's just some common peasant woman, and Joseph is just some guy. They're not kings and queens. They're not royalty. They're just nobodies from a nowhere place, kind of just going along in the midst of life. Jeffrey?
I was just going to say,
They're flawed people, which is redundant. That's pretty good. Yes, I like that.
It also, if I could, it also speaks, does it not, maybe a little bit over my skis, but to the idea of grace, in that they're selected. They didn't do anything to merit it per se, right? And if I were giving the sermon, I might conclude with something like, why Abraham? Why Moses? Why Zechariah? Why not Zechariah, Moses? Why not you? Right? That's sort of the idea. They didn't do anything that disqualified them, but by the same token, they didn't seemingly do anything that actually distinguished them far and away above others. So why
you
not?
are sounding dangerously close like a Protestant preacher right now.
It's rubbing off.
Just pointing that out. Is there the idea of grace within Judaism?
No, we don't really have that.
Don't really have that. What is grace? What's he talking about again? Unmerited, unearned love from God. So even if you're not a good person, God still loves you. That's consistent within Judaism,
Yes.
to be sure.
Yes.
And it's picked up and emphasized heavily in the New Testament, specifically in the writings of Paul. Romans is all about that, grace through faith. what were you going to say about hope?
Memory.
About memory.
Yeah.
What is, this story has embedded in it the whole notion of memory, which is not immediately obvious, and you start thinking about, why is the memory of Elijah, of the priestly caste that Zechariah is from, where Elizabeth is from, the Aaronic or Aaron's line, what the promises were, who John the Baptist will be, all those things. Memory is a very important idea that's just underneath.
So in the same way as Jonathon invited us to understand that to best appreciate this story, it helps to have context of the wider world in which it was embedded or that it was drawn out of, such that the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth being childless or being barren would have echoes from earlier Old Testament Jewish biblical stories. And that becomes important. We spoke a bit about that plumb line. That would have been familiar.
What's the plumb line? What Bible story does that come from?
The
temple?
The plumb line?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's biblical. We'll look it up for next time.
I don't know. The idea being that the story we're reading is an echo of earlier stories and is intended to point us towards something else. Right? We said Advent is an anticipatory period of time, or getting ready. Yes? And so I shared with Jonathan this morning, there's a turn of phrase that's really rather wonderful from a late Jewish leader named Leonard Fine, who suggested that memory is history plus hope. If something's worth remembering, it's not just so that you have a recollection of what took place, but if it's worth holding on to as memory, it's because we hope, as a result of that memory, that we may be able to do something or be mindful of something as we go forward.
I think a plumb line is a plumber term, but it's the main pipe.
That may very well be. I think of it as sort of, Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain is dropping
I'll bring the
a line.
biblical reading next week.
It runs all the way through it. Yeah,
It's for determining verticality.
that's what I understood too.
Plumb comes from the old name for lead. It had a lead ball on the bottom that would pull the line down, and that would give you a vertical reference. That's the plumb line.
Excellent. That's how I understood it metaphorically, but that's very helpful. It helps also with accuracy. It goes directly down. Okay. What I meant is that we're sort of linking these stories, right? I'm referring to it, maybe I'm using it incorrectly, but as a literary a reference that this story of a couple who can't conceive is an echo of earlier ones, and there's sort of a trope that runs through, right? Such that their circumstance, this couple's circumstance, gives rise to praying to God, having dreams fulfilled, right? That idea that none of these stories presents as the first time we have this issue in a family, whether it's between siblings, whether it's between spouses, whether it's between generations, right? And that becomes what I'm referring to as the plumb line. Or, if you will, the stories that we read in the biblical tradition are not true because they took place as described, but rather they're true because they take place again and again and again.
Didn't John have to be special because he baptizes Jesus? He's the one that baptizes Jesus. So he has to have a lineage.
Does John have to be special because he baptizes Jesus?
He has to come from somewhere. Special.
Right? Why John the Baptist then, right?
What
was it about John the Baptist that gave him that pride of place?
When Jesus shows up to be baptized by John in the river Jordan, what does John say to him? He does not say, I'm baptizing you in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Why do you come to me? I'm not worthy.
Why do you come to me? I'm not worthy. Right. You should be baptizing me. He recognizes he's not worthy or earned it or merited because the other one's better than this. But he still does it. So I shouldn't say this to Allison because Allison always says I'm her favorite rector. I'm her only rector, but nonetheless, the merit or goodness or morality of the priest is not what makes the sacrament valid. And this goes back a very long time to what's called the Donatist controversy. If you got all these priests running around who've done nefarious things and they marry somebody, is that couple married or not? Is the communion valid? Though in everything that they might do. So a long time ago, there had to be rulings that no matter how rotten the priest is at the time, as long as his getting this right, classicist, as long as his orders were valid, he was a validly ordained priest by the bishop and so on, that those sacraments were valid, was the word used. So it didn't matter the person, what mattered was the order and the intent and these other type things. So in the same case with John the Baptist, is he particularly holy? Maybe more than most, but not more than Jesus. And so but any of us could be good or bad, but our actions over time begin to form who we are. Jeffrey?
Things like grace and mercy always supersede individuality.
Grace and mercy supersede individual what? Individuality. That's part, very good. That's part of the point. No matter what good or bad I do, the ideas of grace and mercy supersede all that. God's goodness covers our inadequacy. That is part of the point. What other questions, thoughts? Margaret?
You talked about plumb lines. To me, there's lots and lots of people out there. To me, this has got a lot to do with heritage because it all seems to come back to one family of cousins, generations, or whatever. It's all like the plumb line of like cultural heritage of that family. And then you know, there it comes. Because there's millions of families out there, but this doesn't seem to transgress past that particular.
Maybe. Interesting point. I'm not sure I can. Plumb line and inheritance? Heritage. They certainly could be. Something to bring up that this is also an Advent story. This is memory plus hope. But interestingly, with Advent, it adds another dimension, another idea to it, by nature being Advent. Memory plus hope plus what else? Yes, Susie, but I'm specifically saying the future. That's what's there. Preparation is about the future. And so you have to have the memory part. Remember when Elijah did this, John the Baptist is this new Elijah figure. And remember that Zechariah comes from this long line of priests, and Elizabeth comes from the role of Aaron, and all of that. And here's what God is going to do in the new one, but it looks towards the future. So it's grounded in the past with this memory of hope, but also hope in the future. Chris?
I don't know if most people know who Abijah was. I looked it up. He's the grandson of Solomon, so he's in the
Abijah, Abijah or Bija, is the grandson of Solomon. So back to the temple, the great temple builder. Excellent point. So they got cred. We would do that in the same way, what our name signifies, or I've met some really important people, or I've had dinner with, it gives you greater credibility to be connected to them. None of you name drop, I hope. Okay. Everybody does that all the time. I'm good friends with Allison W. right over here. So, yep. Still nobody wants to act out the Zechariah story? I was really, really hoping that would be so fun. Any last questions? So, Zechariah and Elizabeth preparing for Advent. Again, we just hardly ever get the story. Next week, we're going to continue on and think of, for the next 2 weeks, what is the role of the Messiah in Christianity and the role of the Messiah within Judaism? Why is Jesus not recognized as the Messiah within Judaism? Does everybody know the answer to that question? I want you to know the answer to that before you leave here next week. Do you know the answer to that?
I'm not sure I do.
I do. Okay, good. We're good. Thank you all very much.